press record. Bro, so thank you so much. Obviously, welcome to Diversity in London. Thank you to everyone so far that has joined us. Some of you may have already come to this before, but for any newcomers, welcome. Today, we have got the lovely Laura and Ben from OB Talent. For any of you that don't know, OB Talent is actually part of Oliver Bernard, but it's our sister company. They offer a slightly different service to our kind of normal tech recruitment. But yeah, today's not about that. This is about diversity. So I'm just going to pass it over to you, Ben and Laura, and you can get started.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you all for joining as well. Yeah, really happy to be here talking to you guys today. It's a big area that we're obviously very passionate about, and Laura will go into details to how it fits into kind of OB Talent as well. But today we'll be really discussing and considering diversity in all its forms. Are quotas the answer to building a diverse and inclusive team as well? And really looking to just have an open discussion and kind of talk through your thoughts and feelings about these subjects. So we'll start with some introductions. So Laura, you can go first.
Hey, I'm Laura. Nice to meet you all. I won't talk too much about OB Talent. I'll just cover very quickly. We offer talent consultancy, and a fair chunk of that fits around the DE&I space. My background is much more tech. So we've won awards previously for organisations helping them improve diversity, quite often with a stance around females, which you would probably expect from a tech perspective. And our business splits organically. One side is embedded, so you need recruitment, but you don't want to spend it with a recruitment agency. You want somebody on site to do it for you. That's us. And the other side, like I said, is the talent consultancy bit. DE&I, should I say, is something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I'm Ben. I've been in recruitment for about 12 years now. A lot of that was agency, now mostly in-house for the last 4 years, and predominantly been recruiting across kind of tech and products, mostly during my career as well. Like Laura, I've got a keen interest in D&I. I think going in-house and having that exposure to organizations and just how they go about their hiring strategy has really kind of piqued my interest. So yeah, been really keen to kind of have these discussions, talk about some of these important areas, and get more involved in these meetups as well. So yeah, if we just kind of dive straight in, kind of into the format for today. As it says on the slides, it is really an open discussion. So despite these slides being up, this isn't going to be a presentation. I'm not looking to kind of dictate D&I to you. It's more about getting your feelings and your opinions on the strategies that companies employ, what quotas are, as we've kind of suggested as well. We'll cover bits of intersectionality. So it is an open discussion, and therefore I want this to be a safe space as well. There are going to be things that we're going to discuss today which could be quite emotive, could be things that people might have strong opinions about, and we want it to be a conversation that we're facilitating to have both sides of the debate rather than having through one lens. So feel free to bring forward anything that you think is relevant, anything that might be personal as well. I'm surely going to be sharing some personal experiences myself and things that have kind of occurred to me or I've experienced during my career. So please feel free to kind of bring up anything that you think might be relevant, and I'm sure we'll all be able to share and be respectful. So diving straight into it, it's a bit of a contentious question, I know, but hands up, and I know obviously some of you got your cameras off, but I think you've got kind of a hands up signal you can do, but hands up if you think quotas are a good idea.
Ben, my profuse apologies. I know what it means, but could you explain a little bit as okay, my apologies for playing devil's advocate, the rationale behind quotas? Does that make sense? Absolutely,
yeah. That's a great question. It's a great start.
I'm just speaking as a POC. I know what quotas are, but it sounds very American. Does that make sense?
Anyway. It does, yeah. And it's effectively a policy that's an affirmative action. So it's really looking at trying to increase representation of perhaps an underrepresented group. And a lot of the time, these things can be the mandatory or voluntary, and normally have kind of a number on what you're trying to do. So it might be, for example, you want to hire 20 women into the business because you want more diversity. So that's really kind of the quota you've set. It could be in the application process, even when you're reviewing CVs, you want them from different demographics, but generally it's going to be something you've kind of got a fixed number on or a fixed percentage that you're looking to increase by, and that's really what you're working towards.
You want us to put our hands up if we agree?
Yes, I saw a couple of hands up actually.
Yeah.
So very curious to start. So Raf, I saw your hand fire up as well. So what is it that you like about quotas? What do you think, I guess, that is good about them? How do they bring value?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on the situation that you're using them and why you're using them as well. So it has to be, it has to be legal as well. So you need to be doing it for a reason, because you have a group that's underrepresented, and it's to give yourself more, I guess, more of a diverse pool into the pipeline. Then I very much believe it's about the best person for the job. But I guess it's that discussion about equality versus equity. And for me, I think the old adage of equality is giving everyone the same starting point. But for me, it's being able to lift everyone to have the same end point. So if you can get as many people in to have a rich pipeline, then you can have as many people that might be successful into the process, irrespective of what they look like. But it's giving everyone the same price, giving the same start, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's some real merits to it. And as you say, it's about that kind of application process and having that kind of diverse pipeline as well. In some cases, you know, some of these quotas are more kind of enforced, or they can be things that really kind of generalize people as well. Do you find that the quota system still allows for people to kind of bring their authentic selves, or do you think it's more kind of that tokenism? Because that, I guess, is a bit of a risk you have when you're bringing people in. You don't want to give them a job on merit, as you said, but it can be seen as a bit more of a box ticking exercise.
Yeah, I think you need to make sure that your culture's in a place where, and your process in a place where there isn't unconscious bias, or if it is, then it's controlled, and people are well trained who are coming through the process, and then aren't conscious necessarily of, we need to bring X number of Black people through, X number of disabled people through it, or from any underrepresented group. It's more about, let's get a richer pipeline of people through, and if we're not, let's look at why, and then looking at that data. So having a quota, not necessarily in terms of we need to bring in this many people, but let's try and have more of a diverse pipeline, and it might be a certain percentage of certain groups within that pipeline. As to who gets the job afterwards, and that's a question after.
Yeah, that's quite a nice approach. It's as I say, it's quite balanced. There's different types of quotas. Has anyone had an experience of, or another reason why they might be good? Has anyone got anything else they'd like to add? Sorry, a hand up. I can't see your name though, unfortunately. I think I'm presenting.
Rita's got her hand up.
Oh, Rita, sorry, apologies.
Yeah, no need, because Raf, I believe, has already covered pretty much what I think, actually. I believe quotas are very important to start with, because if we do want to generate more diverse companies, and we have loads of resistance to change from a handful of companies as well, I think we have to start somewhere. And quotas gives us the means to do it. What I think makes a difference is precisely the strategies that we are employing and the why behind it. Are we doing it because we really want to look good in front of the cameras? Are we doing it because we want to fulfill something that a law says? Or are we doing it because we really believe, because there are studies that show that companies can be more competitive and more productive with diversity? Are we doing it to apply to different recruitment strategies to try to get to more diverse people? Or are we doing it, as I said previously, because we need to reach a certain metric for something that we made completely up to look good? So I think quotas can be very important, but the why and the how are even more important than a certain quota.
That's a really interesting point you mentioned about that kind of the motivations behind it. And I think it kind of, obviously it's not so much about their hiring strategies, but a lot of businesses last year, after the Black Lives Matters movement and with George Floyd, started posting black squares on Instagram and on LinkedIn, all these things. And as you said, it was the reasoning behind it wasn't so much to show necessary solidarity. It was kind of more that kind of PR exercise of just appearing on the right side of an argument. And so it is, yeah, definitely about making sure that you've got the motivations in place and you know why you're doing something rather than doing it just for the sake of it. Has anyone got any kind of counter arguments or any thoughts about why quotas might be bad? Because I'll be honest, I came into this call thinking my opinion was pretty set. I thought quotas were awful. The research I've done is showing me some advantages to them, definitely. But hearing Raf and from Rita, you really kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Anyone else got anything they'd like to add, perhaps why quotas aren't so great?
From my point of view, if I could add something, I think that I'm like on the fence. I can see why quotas are there, but ultimately, I guess I've got to find the right words how to put it. Ultimately, it's to try and improve diversity in those organisations. But let's look at the tech industry. Say for females, for example, we try and improve diversity in one company. It actually is still creating a problem somewhere else, because as a whole, there's not enough people in that or these certain groups in that industry. So from an agency recruitment perspective, everyone is asking for the same, or have got the same quotas and asking for the same thing. It is just shifting the problem from one company and just resolving it for one, but creating it for another. So that's what I can see from my perspective. But I can also understand why quotas are there, because it does open you up to kind of bringing those other groups in your organization. So yeah, I guess there's both sides for it for me.
I think I can probably talk to Norsha's side and being in-house and doing a lot more on the talent piece. And I don't always go down well when I say this, but I'm not a big lover of them. Ben's got some examples of where they work really well, but I find most companies that I have to be very careful because I've been heads of talent for companies and need to be mindful of that. But a lot of companies I've either worked in-house for, supported with, quite often, I don't always believe what's behind the quotas. And what I find, if we talk predominantly at the tech industry, sweeping generalization, but if you're asked to put a female CV in against a male CV and it's a senior position, there aren't as many of them. And I think at the root cause, what we probably need to think more about is how do we bring more people from diverse backgrounds, be it females, be it somebody from the LGBTQ community, whoever it is we're talking about. If we're talking about race or ethnicity, how do you bring more people through from the pipeline? And then there's a danger that you don't want everybody to be junior that you're bringing through. So how do you help people progress internally, I think? So there's two sides. It's quotas for quota's sake. I don't ever want to be the token woman or the token gay woman. I'm also from a low socioeconomic background. I don't particularly want to be hired for any of those reasons. Equally, I don't want to not be hired because I don't have a degree. So I think quotas work well. In an example you gave me earlier, Ben, I'll let you take over, but they work well in some industries when the talent is already there. They're just not being given the opportunity to display themselves. I think the problem is more systemic. Personally, I think it goes back to schools. And I think most of us probably know that by the time I think we're 5, our personalities are fully formed. It might even be earlier. It's quite hard to change our minds. Sweeping, but girls tend to be given pink toys and told they're beautiful. Boys tend to be told they're smart and strong. By the time we get them through to STEM education, the dropout rate is phenomenal, even when they go through. And then on top of that, we often say, join us in the world of tech, but you don't need to be a developer, which for me is quite like a false positive, because it's almost going, you can come and work with us in tech, ladies, but you can be a product manager, which is absolutely fine, but you could also engineer. So I think putting everything down to quotas is dangerous. I think it's a much more systemic societal problem that needs to be fixed. And the danger that sits behind it is people go, let's find people of color, let's find people. I mean, that's what people want at the moment. They want you to find diverse candidates that aren't white, and they want you to find females. So my concern there is, what happens if you have a disability? What happens if outside of disability, race, gender, sexuality, like I guess from an intersectionality perspective, which I know you'll touch on, Ben, but I worry it leaves certain people behind.
Yeah, absolutely. There is that kind of blanket rule, and we will go into kind of intersectionality shortly anyway. But I can agree more. If the opportunities aren't there, and they haven't been historically, that's a systemic issue. And I think that's what actually, when we'll touch on it in terms of intersectionality, is quotas can sometimes expose some of the flaws that we have as a society, more so than really kind of identifying where the talent is. Just to follow on from Laura's point as well, in terms of those examples of some quotas that have worked, I'm not sure if anyone here is a fan of American football at all, or follows the NFL, but they implemented something a few years ago called the Rooney Rule. And the Rooney Rule is effectively that when a team is interviewing for a head coaching position, they have to interview at least 2 people of color out of the 10 people that they meet with. And so to give you an example, just previous to them implementing this rule, only 2 coaches in the whole of the NFL were people of color, despite the league being player-wise representative of about 65% people of color playing in the actual sport. And the Rooney Rule, this quota system has actually led to the league now having teams being coached by 25% people of color. So the change has been quite drastic. And I think it's that kind of difference, as you were kind of suggesting, Rita, in terms of your motivations, your strategy. Are these people CVs that you've just been throwing in the bin, or are these people that you really need in the business and that you've been actually not having the opportunity to hire, and then you're going out of your way to bring in. But that's just one example. There's a lot of other things that have been happening in Europe. And I was saying to Laura, didn't even think quotas were a real thing. I thought it was one of those things that people kind of spoke about, and it was a bit more of a kind of a fear-mongering thing that gets people people's backs up. But it's worked in places like Switzerland and Norway as well at board level. But again, these things haven't necessarily resulted in the same successes that we would see at a team or individual contributor level.
And can you read the comment if you're presenting, or do you want me to read them
yes,
out?
sorry, yeah, I didn't even see those come up.
Yeah, so Hammond said, you think employers don't really give a concern about diversity, including disabled people. They seem shamed as they're competing with other companies. I think that was probably to me, I'm assuming. Yes and no is my answer. It depends on the employer, but I think that's the problem. There are lots of people playing, I guess, in this field where they want to be seen to be caring. I think there are plenty that are, but that message becomes diluted. Is my personal opinion. And then you've got another one, great point on the systemic nature of what and how the approach of quotas should be taken on board. And then Christopher says, this sounds identical, Ben, what you're describing, to soccer or football, that we call it here in the UK, but with less change and forward movement.
Definitely, yeah, we see it in the English game. There's no real representation at kind of a management or coaching level. You get a couple of people every so often, but really they're kind of real outliers, and the people who've often progressed upwards into that role rather than someone who's going to quit the job and just got given the job immediately, a la kind of a Frank Lampard or someone like that. So there's definitely more need for the kind of these structures and ability to kind of bring people in. It is just a matter of understanding, I guess, the nuances of people's backgrounds as well, and how they kind of intersect, which nicely brings me on to the kind of intersectionality side of things. So I'll actually open this up rather than me kind of just explaining it. I'll obviously will, if you're not too sure, but has anyone heard of intersectionality at all or know much about it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Anyone want to give us a breakdown? It's not a problem if you don't. I can.
I guess the easiest way that we could look at it in the context of diversity is where people might fall under a range of diverse groups. My ethnicity is of mixed heritage. My mum's Indian, my dad's from Sierra Leone in West Africa. I'm an ADHD sufferer as well. So I guess, my affliction of approaching the job market or obstacles that I could face, would then, the intersectionality could be from both a neurodiverse and an ethnicity or cultural kind of perspective. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure, lots of people, I think Laura, what she described, from the perspective of being part of the LGBT community and being female would be another prime example. But any sort of number of onset underrepresented or underrepresented or marginalized groups where you could fall into a number of those categories.
Fantastic. Yep. Said it all for me. I didn't. Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, exactly that. It's exactly that in terms of that kind of crossover of social identities, as that kind of diagram shows as well, the kind of overlap that people have. And that really kind of, I guess, from what I was reading, one quote I liked was that it's kind of a pivot on diversity. It's kind of a bit more nuanced, just going a bit further into the detail. So, I think commonly I was kind of part of that BAME category, which, was how we were described up until very recently. I personally didn't really have any problem with it. But when you actually look at it, it does really kind of a blanket describe how everyone is we're all, of a different ethnicity. Therefore, we all kind of come into this group. And there's so much more to us in terms of our backgrounds that people might not be aware of, in terms of your economic background, disabilities that might be visible or invisible, things about your age, for example, all these sorts of things. So it really is then kind of layering that and understanding, I guess, how we can be inclusive if we're running quotas, which might just say we want women, but might be then as a blanket term, I guess, assuming that Black women, trans women, gay women, Asian women all have the same sort of experiences, and effectively we don't need to do any more work than that.
Mm-hmm.
So has anyone got any thoughts, I guess, of how that might fit into quotas, whether or not even like Rita and Raf, for example, you guys raise really good points about why quotas are a good thing. Do you think the intersectionality kind of actually maybe kind of contradicts that a bit, or do you think actually you could actually complement it, and if you go in the right approach and try and tailor your search for the right people?
Yeah, I think it's about having a broad view and trying to get as many different people through the process. Also, it's not about one protected characteristic, and in fact, it's not just the ones that are prescribed by law either. It's someone from a certain area of the country, does someone have an accent? It's just trying to get a really rich mix of people into your pipeline. And I guess going back to when you're talking about quotas as well, there's some areas where you can't get away from it. For example, a police force, if particularly after the Macpherson inquiry as well, and it showed the kind of systemic racism, without having people from the communities they're serving in the police force, they're never going to be representative of the communities they serve, and they'll still have the same problems perpetuating. So if you didn't have a quota or at least some target to try and bring more people from those groups into the police force, you're going to constantly have the same battle if you're not kind of outwardly conscious of it.
Sorry, go on, Laura.
Raf, I don't know if you can see me smiling because there's lots of faces on the screen, but Ben and I were talking about this earlier. Do you think that Ben asked me a question, which I'll ask you if that's okay. Is there a difference between quotas in, I guess, the private sector? So we've been talking quite heavily about tech, but I guess, any limited company, anyone that's floated on the stock exchange versus public sector. So thinking probably more so the military, the police force, the NHS. Do you think there's a difference in those quotas in terms of requirements and how you go about them?
Yeah, there is. So there's definitely a greater responsibility because I guess because they're publicly funded and they're there to serve the community, they need to be more socially responsible, but only because they are funded by us. There's no reason why everyone shouldn't be that way. And in an ideal society, companies would be there for social good as well as public sector companies. The problem is, like you said, sometimes it's just number for a number's sake. And I'll give you an example. You said it's between these four walls. So when I used to work as an HR manager in the police, there was one question in every interview, irrespective of which role you went for, whether it's police officer, police staff, and that was around respect for race and diversity. The way the questions were formulated was so formulaic that you could learn how to answer the question properly, or you could say something that was maybe offensive purely by accident, and any score below 3 out of 5 on that question is an instant fail. So often you're failing people that simply just don't understand or know how to apply their knowledge to a question, rather than someone who's a racist or is sexist or has discrimination or harassment against one of those groups. That's where it becomes a problem. And it's all about just trying to be clever, not clever, trying to be wise about these things. Why are we trying to do it? What is the reason behind it? And then let's go and try and put a method in place to deliver it.
Could I make a brief point, less than 20, 30 seconds?
Of course, please do.
Hi, can everyone actually hear me with clarity?
Yep.
Yeah. It's very strange actually. I've met Nosheen before online and some other people. But the thing is, I take, for example, my mum, literally 1978, she was 19 years old. She was born in Quetta, which is between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I was born in Glasgow in 1984. So part of that millennial generation post 1981. You're talking about the workplace. Let's focus on the workplace, right? So my mum, she works with people that have learning disabilities. I've told you what learning disability I have. I have a hidden disability. But for example, at work, someone would say to her, I'm not going to look into the ethnicity of this person. It's a big minefield. So this person said to my mum, she grew up in Glasgow in Scotland. And when she comes south of the border in England to work, she has a very pronounced accent. Let's give this an example. But it's not a very strong Glaswegian accent. It's a soft Glaswegian accent. And I'm sorry, I don't know if that exists, but it does. So she has a very soft Glaswegian accent. So she's working in Tower Hamlets, which is East London. There were certain reasons why I had to move out of Tower Hamlets. I won't give you the reasons, but there was too many gangs there. That's one thing. But outside of that, that's a personal thing. Second thing I will say with regards to my mum is that she has a soft Glaswegian accent. So one of her colleagues, now she's had to make a complaint. My mum, if you can hear me, my mum has had to go to her superiors. So her superior is a South African. She's an Afrikaner. She's Afrikaans. You can Google it if you know what it is. So she's an Afrikaans head teacher in Tower Hamlets, as in like hierarchy. So she's the head. She's a head teacher, and she's gone to the deputy head and said, "Excuse me, this person is bullying me." And this person has been like that with different colleagues. We're speaking about the workplace. So it's important to have a real scenario. Then I'll keep quiet, my apologies. So she was mocked. My own mother was mocked because she had a more educated, I can tell you about certain communities in Tower Hamlets, which I won't talk about, but she has a more educated, quote unquote, accent than this other person. And that frustrated that person. And they'd say, oh, why are you talking funny? And then I thought, why is he saying that to you? Then my mum, I can tell you where my mum's from. My mum basically had to bring that complaint with her line manager, with the deputy head. And then the person came, and you know what the person did to my mum? Basically, he came literally begging and said, oh, please, don't say anything. I might lose my job. And the tune, his tune completely changed. And my mum's been telling me about this for 8 years.
Wow. It's still going on now?
No, it's finished now because she's rectified it. Other people just left. They said, well, we can't deal with it. And my mum was bullied. I'm going to tell you who live in Tower Hamlets, you go there when you see it. But there was a certain community that I was bullied by there. I can give you an answer, but I won't. But the point is they bullied my mum. And I thought to myself, she had to tell the headmaster. She had to tell the head, the deputy head. Then it got rectified up to a point just because of her educated Glaswegian accent. That's a true story. I wanted to share that.
Well, no, thank you for sharing, because it does just highlight the importance of inclusion, really, doesn't it? I think, we've all been there when we've felt like we've been excluded, or that, someone is not respecting us, or we've even seen people not respect our colleagues, perhaps because of the background they have, or perhaps something that's physical, something that might not be. There's all these things that can really contribute to making it a really hard place to be and to work. And after all, this is why we're having these conversations, right? Because I think we're all invested in making sure that the workplace.
I wanted to give a true story. My apologies. I'll keep quiet now. It's a true story.
Absolutely. No, please feel free to chime in. This is an open discussion. So it's really good to hear everyone's voices, really, to be honest, and anyone's perspectives, experiences. I've certainly had personal experiences where I felt, tokenism has come in. I remember being wheeled out at college for pretty much every photo shoot. I was at the open days for any ethnic minority potential applicants, because it's my job to try and coax them in because I was the face. And, that became that kind of quota part of it, because the college obviously wanted more people who look like me, and who better to go get them than someone who looks like me as well. So, we've all got these different experiences, and they all really kind of tie into the fact that we all want to work in inclusive places. And those experiences just informing the decisions that we make in terms of the places we choose to work, or the fact that we're at meetups like this today.
Do you, I guess, I'm just checking I wasn't on mute. Sorry, my cat was meowing loads, so I've been on and off mute. How would you feel? I don't want to necessarily call anybody out because I'm looking at you all, but that's unfair. But if someone could answer it, it would be great. How would you feel if you got the job based on a characteristic? I'm not talking about the protected ones by law, but if you got it because you were Black or Asian or gay or disabled or female. And then I guess the flip side, I don't know if we've got any white males on the call, but if you were a white male and you didn't get it, or you felt you didn't get it because you didn't hit those characteristics, could someone, I guess, let me know how you'd feel if you knew that's why you got a job?
Laura, could you repeat your question? My profuse apologies.
Yeah, no worries. How would you feel if you knew the reason that you were offered a job was because you hit a quota?
For me, I think I'd be slightly disappointed. I think you'd want to know that you got it on merit, and that you got it on your skill set, and that you got it based on your technical ability, as opposed to kind of any sort of characteristic.
Yeah, I would second that, and I think that's like the line, the sort of championing diversity treads, not in a sense that it's not necessary, because it absolutely fundamentally is a must. A lot of people spoke about the tech industry, and I recruit in the tech industry. When you look at it, it's something where underrepresentation is massive, and I think, but at the same time, sort of being part of a protected group for the reasons I described earlier, I would still want to feel that any opportunity that I was afforded, and I started this job, for example, literally last week, you know, I'd want to feel that was one on individual merit, and nothing else alone, you know. So it's definitely sort of a philosophical kind of wrangling, really, you know, which really does need open and honest candor and speaking about, you know, that from not just from marginalized groups, but both sides, you know, like all sides, you know, of the equation, because, you know, I think that's just, at the end of the day, people just want to feel that, you know, that there's an equality of equity and opportunity, and, you know, it really does drill down to that for me, you know.
A hard question, sorry to point out at you, Christopher, someone else might want to jump in, but how do you ensure that? So I guess a difference for me is most people don't know I'm gay unless I tell them. They don't know that I come from a lower socioeconomic background. I grew up in Kingston. Most people don't realise there's a rough side of Kingston, but there actually is.
Oh, yeah.
But people just assume because I'm white, they think straight away I'm educated. They just assume that I'm straight. So actually, some people I think sometimes have spoken really openly in front of me about, you know, the types of people they want to recruit and why, assuming that I fit that type of bracket. And I'm like, oh, which is great for me because I can turn around and say, oh, I'd probably get back in your box actually. So it's quite a fun party trick. And there's a couple of other things in there which I won't steal the limelight because this isn't about me talking so much, but bearing in mind I've seen the flip side where probably had they have known I wasn't educated, I probably wouldn't have got the job. Actually, they've just assumed and they've maybe skimmed over things. But you pull all of that in and you go, right, I've landed the job now. How do you make sure you retain people? So if quotas are if they're a way to get people through, taking intersectionality, how do you make sure you keep people? Because to Ben's point earlier, there's an assumption, I get it all the time, like, what's it like being a gay woman in London, or what your friends like? I'm like, well, they're not all gay, you know, or I can't answer on behalf of every female that likes other women. Like it's just the most ridiculous question I ever get asked. So when I work in an environment, this is going to sound really awful, but I hate joining LGBT groups in the workforce because I don't want it to define me. In fact, I really hate it. I don't want to have to talk on behalf of every lesbian. And I get quite frustrated, which is wrong. You probably see it. It's probably my own internalized homophobia coming out, isn't it? Which is wrong, but honest. But when you put all of that together, Christopher, how do you go, right, you've started, you're not just one thing, you're everything potentially, or 2 or 3 things on this list. How do you make sure that you build those inclusive teams so that people stay?
I think that's a really good question. And I think for me, like the easiest way that I can think of doing that is, I think growing up, my peer groups, my peer circles were always, before diversity became a bigger thing, perhaps due to maybe recent events, such as ones that Ben described, was just sort of keeping those cycles diverse in my personal life, so that it's just so much of a non-issue when I'm in a work situation, that it's a lot more kind of normalized, if that makes any sense, you know. So to kind of branch out what I would consider my usual social circles, you know, and to kind of encourage others around me to do the same thing. But I find that that's really the best I can do, you know, just to kind of just feel like it is less of an issue, and like I have to feel less like I'm championing being Black, for example, or Asian, you know, for a wide number of other people. And I think that's all I really can do. You know, I think, you know, it's very difficult, you know, to approach, you know, in the workplace where perhaps, you know, quotas might be a bit lower, or you know, or where there might not be as rich you know, sort of a diversity range as you would envisage to begin with. But I think that's all I really do, to be honest, and just kind of hold on to that. I mean, quite often at social events, if my friends are there, I mean, I went to a wedding last week with my partner who hadn't met a lot of my friends, and she just looked and was like, this is the most eclectic group of people that I could imagine being at a wedding. And I think that's just the way that I've kind of broached that all along. I know it doesn't really help in a work situation, but
no, I think it does, because it touches on the fact that you've educated yourself, right, about other cultures and about people's backgrounds, and expose yourself to that via communication with these people, but also probably some learning you might have done in your own time as well. I think, you know, if you take that into the corporate world and into the working environment, it is about educating people. And if I speak anecdotally, you know, the best experience I had from kind of a DE&I perspective was probably when I worked at a travel company. I won't tell you the name. You can look at my LinkedIn profile, but they're really well known. And I went in for my interview, and it was in October, and they had Black History Month up on all the screens. And then when I started in November, they started rolling out the next campaigns and the next things and events and things in the calendar which I wasn't aware of, going by our Christian calendar in the UK. You know, we're not always aware of all the different holidays that might go on for different faiths and different cultures. So that was a real opportunity to educate myself and educate also the colleagues around me, because this was being kind of marketed to everyone and advertised on a kind of a weekly basis as well. So I think, yeah, I definitely see what you mean in terms of bringing that into the workplace also. Rita, you got your hand up as well. Sorry, talking for a bit.
Thank you. So first of all, you all raised excellent points. Actually, I never even considered before this intersectionality issue and what it really brings to the table, because actually what I'm trying to do at the company where I'm working is not exactly establish quotas, but it's really trying to understand how we can create a pool of candidates for our roles that are more diverse, and then we can proceed with our recruitment process as unbiased, as unbiased as we can. But I really wanted to share that if it happened to me, if I got the job because of my skin color or my gender, or I didn't get the job because they needed to put another person of another skin color with even a complete different skill set, I wouldn't be very happy about it either. But it never happened to me. But one of my best friends, she has a very clear and evident disability. She moves in a wheelchair, and she struggled to get a job as a psychologist here in Portugal, because unfortunately lots of buildings, streets, roads, they don't have proper accesses. So some things that we take for granted, she cannot take for granted. And so a lot of opportunities had her blocked right there. It didn't happen during the pandemic because obviously the interviews were conducted via Zoom like this one or Skype, but there were on-site jobs, and the accessibilities, they were very hard. So what she tried to do was access municipalities and public programs for psychologists using the quota system. And that really helped her get into the job where she is now. The problem is that people look upon her, and some of the colleagues, at least that's the experience that she shares with me, and obviously allowed me to share it here as well, because I told her I would be participating in this type of webinar, is yeah, Rita, it's very great when there are opportunities and quotas for people like me, because it's a way for me to thrive and have access to opportunities. But when you get there and you understand that you are not really included, you are included in a group of people that share the same disability as you do, and putting in a room, they're putting you in a room and don't see you as one of their own. If there are quotas, why aren't there strategies for inclusion? And that's why earlier before I shared with you that I believe that behind quotas, there needs to be a very clear reason why. And as Laura, I believe it was Laura who raised the issue, how do you retain those people? Because the same thing happened to you, Ben. How do you keep going to a company that, let's say that you're not Christian, how do you keep going to a company that everything they do revolves around the Christian calendar, and they don't even think that there are people from other religious backgrounds or no religious background at all. So I believe, to answer your question, Laura, to retain those diverse people, we need to start rock bottom, and we need to look inside the company's culture and try to understand, okay, what is this culture based upon? What dates are we celebrating? How are we communicating? Are we using inclusive language at all? Do our employees know what that is? I would start by there, but it's definitely a really complex issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rita. You've almost got it spot on. Being in HR for some time, I know someone else on the call was in HR as well. I think it's you, Raf, actually. I'll read out your comments, Ben, in a minute because you can't see it. I think it's absolutely that. It's probably going back to basics even before that, which isn't the sexy stuff, actually. It's not talking about what we do brilliantly and thinking about how we all feel. It's saying, if we're going to be diverse and we want to make sure that people with disabilities, hidden or seen, physical, can come to the workplace, how do we make sure that they can access the workplace? Or if it's a mental disability or learning disabilities, how do we make sure that they've got the support that they need? So, is it somebody that's hard of hearing? So we provide some level of audio support. Is it somebody that's blind, for example? There are lots of, we could go on forever. If you geek out on reading about all things people, I don't expect that you do, but the World Economic Forum is brilliant. The pages, every 2 years they come out with about 500-page report, and they've focused on it less this year, but the last couple of years they've really talked about the fact that we keep talking about the millennials, Gen Y, etc. Actually, we probably need to now be focusing on people 55 and over, because the birth rate is dropping and we need to retrain people. So if you're going to retrain people, what are you going to invest in retraining so that you keep some of your highly skilled staff? We're talking about religion and we go around this axis. How do we make sure that when it's Eid, we're mindful of our colleagues and how they might be feeling? How do we make sure when it's Christmas, that for those that are genuine Christians, I say that because I'm not, but I follow, I guess, the Christian calendar, that we don't just talk about Father Christmas and presents and getting drunk together, especially for our colleagues who don't drink. If we're talking about culture and race, and not to specifically combine them in geography, but you can't say we want a quota of more people who are racially diverse if we don't allow for ethnicity and culture to come into it. Because I've worked at places before where language becomes a problem. Well, what language are you going to use? And therefore, are we going to be more tolerant of people whose second language is English and we give them time to talk? Because not every company does. So I think it's at grassroots level, not nearly as sexy and fun, but it's the policies, it's the structure and infrastructure that enables you to then say, how do we write our job descriptions? How do we speak to people? Ben, Raf asked a question. Ben, do you feel that you're contradicting yourself, saying that the Rooney Rule worked well and that is the most extreme form of a quota for diversity? It's forcing people into the actual interview process, whereas the other quotas we discussed were about people into the inbox.
It's a really good question, Raf. And there's every possibility that I am. I'll be honest with you. I don't know enough about the Rooney Rule, and I don't know enough about how they've been able to go about their interview process in the past versus where it is now. But from what I do understand, it sounds as if those applications that we're getting from coaches of people that were people of color were just going in the bin. So if anything, the quota system has just enforced a fairer process, I guess, in a lot of ways. It's ensured that people actually get an opportunity to get in front of that person, that interviewer, because previously they were just dismissing it and going, right, how we've kind of commonly seen people with an African name, for example, will have a harder time applying for jobs than someone with an anglicized one. I think it might have been along those lines that people have really struggled in that respect. Now, at least, they're getting in the room, they're having an opportunity to showcase their skills, to kind of highlight what they can do and what their experience is as well, when I don't think they actually had that opportunity previously.
I think we're all a constant contradiction. It's the wondrous nature of being human and intersectionality, isn't it? Like, this topic is so contradictory, and I think I can say one thing one day and then sway the next day because it's emotive, it's subjective. I don't know that there is a rule that's black or white necessarily that's easy for us all to follow. If there was,
You're completely right.
We wouldn't be trying to solve it.
No, I think one thread that's gone through what everyone said, though, is that it shouldn't even have to be a thing, should it? I mean, aside from people having discriminatory views, if you boil it back down to if we're advertising our company in the right way, or if we're genuinely an inclusive company, we can post that kind of collateral about our company and show people what it's like, then naturally people from diverse groups will gravitate towards us because they'll feel like they can belong there. So not just about putting like the black or person on a wheelchair up on your career site, but generally like some real stories about people that are working there. And that's probably the hardest thing to do, because then that goes away from it being a token, we should get these people into our business, to actually, we want these people to feel welcome in the business. It's almost like a reverse approach, isn't it?
Yeah.
Work out what you're actually doing first, and then try and hire people into that model.
It's really interesting you said that, Raf. If you'd have been here at the beginning of our call, Norsh was laughing at Ben and I, because our branding is all just people drawn in squiggles, big, small, tall, short. And actually, when we're only 3 months old, so we're a startup. When we were building it, part of it was I just can't put another stockpile image, you know, of, I'm so sorry to say it, but like one black person smiling, one Asian person smiling, one female smiling in a different environment where all we're looking like someone's just shocked us, you know. I was like, I just can't do it. So yeah, you're right. Well, I agree.
You've just described my career site as well. It's quite
Oh no, don't.
no, seriously. No, it's true though. It's true though, isn't it? Because you do things with good intentions, thinking let's try and make it a place where people can feel welcome. But then by the same measure, you'll have feedback from people like, look, I don't always want to be the person taking the photo.
But
it's just them understanding the reason why.
A retail brand recently, Ben, I don't know if you'll know it, or Norsh, you will, or anybody on the call, because they were in the news, and they advertise, they put a big post out about their recent graduates or apprenticeship program and how excited they were for everybody to join. And again, you can't tell if somebody's got a hidden disability. So there's an assumption straight away by seeing a group of white people that they're all white and educated, which we all make, rather than actually this person could be trans, etc. But the point was, this particular brand has done so much work off the back of BLM to really say, actually, our community is diverse, our customers are diverse. And there was quite a big uproar on social media, because the people that they were then employing aren't the people that technically belong to the communities that they say they're serving. And I think that's the danger, isn't it? Is it's like, actually, are we genuinely linking our brand to our internal culture? Because I think as soon as the two have any level of disconnect, there becomes a friction.
Mm.
I'll briefly say something for like 10 seconds.
Of course.
Yeah, and what I find very, very, very weird, I mean, I'm 37, post 1981, part of that millennial generation. But what I find very, very strange throughout my life is that when we interact with people, we do it, people exist, as a society exists, getting philosophical. Certain people, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here in a polite way, certain people will say, oh, you should be this, you should listen to this type of music, oh, you should be into this. My example is this. In my life, I mean, people don't know what music I listen to or what films I like to watch. In society, for example, if I go to like a comedy night or I'm out into society, I've had many people come up to me and just basically say, oh, you are this, you fall into this category. I'm not going to say the pleasantries that they did use. So you fall into this category, therefore you should like this form of music, therefore you should like to eat this type of food. So the thing that I find very, very weird about society, I've been in the world for 37 years, is that people will assume that you like something without even ever having met you. I find that bizarre when people they make assumptions about what you should be when they don't even know you. I find that completely bizarre. They assume. And my mum's always said, you should never assume.
Yeah, I think it's human nature, Ali. We like people that look like ourselves. We associate ourselves with people that are similar. It's the fight or flight piece. Interestingly, I can see the time, we're wrapping up, I think. But Ben and I were discussing this earlier. So Ben and I have delivered a fair amount of D&I training, I'd say. It's now called DE&I. I've been doing it for years. Recent YouGov research has said that DE&I training for the recruitment process causes more discrimination than were it not to occur. And they're now pulling, public services are now pulling DE&I training from all of their recruitment schemes. Now, that completely shocked me because we usually sell this training. So I was like, oh my goodness. But it's really interesting, actually. And I don't know what sits behind it. But I guess the point is, as people, whether we like to admit it or not, we're kind of innately selfish. We all like to talk about ourselves. We like people that look like us, that have commonalities to us, and people that are different can be scary. And not because that's a cruel intention that we're setting out, but it's how we're programmed. It's what we were set up for. I mean, a long time ago, before we were all sat in front of computers all day.
Yeah, sorry, to follow up on what you're saying, Laura, I'd agree as well. I think, yeah, I definitely agree with that kind of fear. I think it goes back to kind of some stereotyping as well. Ali, I've been victim of it myself, with the assumption that I'm really interested in certain things or that I'm good at certain things. You know, I don't know about you, Christopher, but I'm rubbish at basketball and everyone assumes I'm good at basketball. I've got a friend who bought a basketball the other day and WhatsApped me to tell me and asked me if I want to go play with him. Never spoken to him about basketball in my life. The conversation, the topic has never come up. But yeah,
Also
people
not that tall.
Yeah, I'm 5'11". I'm not going to be good at basketball. Like, yeah, it's not my sport.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 5'10" myself, but I do have quite long,
Got the wingspan,
long arms. Yeah, so yeah, it has happened a few times. Yeah, I think assumed tastes in things like music or food often come up. Yeah, I think yeah, on both sides is really weird because yeah, with the mixed heritage of my parents, when that's known, like yeah, the assumed tastes of food, for example, you know, and the kind of potential for stereotypes on both sides that they can be. Sometimes you do get that, like just that twinge, you know, like where you're just like, oh, here we go again. But yeah, what can you do, right?
it's just try and educate people, I suppose. And that's why I think it ties nicely into that kind of intersectionality bit that we were discussing, because it does just kind of show there are multiple layers to all of us. There are multiple different social identities that we have that make us all unique and different from one another. So, you know, you can't tar people all with the same brush. Ali, I can't say that everyone who's your age group or everyone who's just like you are all into the same things and have all had the same life experiences. That's just not fair, and it's not true. And so, yeah, you're right. It's about not making assumptions, you said, Ali, but also really kind of understanding people rather than, yeah, just second guessing what they must be into based on something you've read or seen on television. Sorry, Nosh, I think you're on mute.
I was on mute, sorry. We've got about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to throw out a quick question. It probably isn't a quick question, but if someone could answer it, it's probably going to be either you, Ben, or Laura. But you mentioned briefly, Laura, earlier about diverse kind of inclusion and diverse, like these groups that are formed within organizations like the LGBTQ communities or a female like group, but how obviously they are categorizing people into certain groups. How do organizations get around that then? Does that make sense with regards to intersectionality?
I mean, it depends on the organization. It depends how good they are at it. If you look at someone like the Environment Agency, they have a group for everything in the world. I think they probably go too far the other way. If you're an employee with them and you fit into these categories, you can spend at least 50% of your job not doing your job. So you just join multiple groups. It depends how progressive people are. Like, it's really unfair of me to say, I've probably grown up a little bit. I'm 38. Ali, I know you said you're 37, but just for some context. And I grew up when it wasn't okay to be gay. Actually, I lost friends when I came out and I had quite a tough time walking down the street. Now, living in London, honestly, I'm all right. There's one street in Hackney I won't walk down with my partner, but other than that, I'm pretty brazen and it doesn't bother me so much. But I think there's something about it's not a formal response, by the way, this is personal, but I think if you're going to have these groups, you really have to ask yourself what the purpose is, because if the purpose is to say, actually, we want to be fairer and more equitable as a parents group, therefore we want paternity and maternity to be matched, because really that's how you'll get more women into senior positions. That's probably one of the biggest ways that you're going to hit and make systemic change. Then that's what it should be about. So for me, if it's about policy change, it's great. I think it becomes dangerous, or it can be perceived to be a jolly when actually that's all it is. And I think some companies, that is really what it is. But the flip side is, if you feel alone, especially if you're in the trans community, if you think for at the moment it's really topical, but if you're in the trans community and you have an opportunity to speak to other people in your employ that feel the same as you, then there's a real benefit. But I don't think you can ever get them all together, Nort. I think people just join lots of different groups.
Yeah, fair enough.
Interesting you bring up intersectionality as a part of that, though, because Harvard University did, I don't know if it's an exercise or a scheme, but they effectively wanted to recruit more women and more people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So they set up a group for a gender committee, and they set up a race committee, and they were each meant to recruit people exclusively for those areas. But neither of them approached any women of color. So no women of color were recruited in, because they were all, the group looking at gender were all just focused on bringing in more women and people of other genders, and the other group were all just focused on race, and really just kind of missed the crossover and just went straight down there. So I think, to Laura's point as well, you kind of have to just push, I guess, for people to join multiple ones to have that crossover and have that cross collaboration and communication. Otherwise, you just get groups quite siloed doing their own thing and really kind of isolated away from the greater mission.
Great. Well, I think that we are coming to an end, but I thought that was really insightful. I hope everyone else, I think everyone contributed to that and made some great points. And took something from it as well. So thank you so much to Laura and Ben for running that talk, and for everyone that contributed and had their kind of say as well. Feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn, and if you've got any other questions or want just a general chat, then we're always there. But yeah, I'll let everyone get going, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care. Nice to meet you all.
Lovely to meet you all.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much, guys. Thank you very much. It's really good you guys did this up, actually. Did this event. Very nice.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thanks.
nice evening.
Thanks
though.
for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Why am I still here? I thought I was